5G technology promised to make us more connected than ever before. My next guest knows exactly where this technology can take us and hopefully how it can tackle some of the inequities that exist in the digital ecosystem out there. Mike Rogers is a former member of Congress, a very cool former member of Congress in my personal opinion, representing Michigan's 8th Congressional District. While in Congress, he was chair of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. But that's going to be a different TV show, a different show another day. Today, he's chairman of the 5G Action Now group. And Congressman Rogers, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. Let me just start out and ask you, because we're talking about 5G as it's almost already here. But I talked to developers, to people out there, and I said, it's still wobbly, it's still spotty. There are permitting problems in cities. We're not all there. So let's not turn this into a rah-rah moment. What is not working out in the 5G space that you need to work out?
And thanks for having me, Steve. It's great to see you. Thanks for the kind words of getting out of Congress is kind of like being on parole. So any kind words at all are well received. So there's several things that we just haven't gotten right yet. And I do think that the marketing and advertising on 5G by companies is a little bit ahead of where we actually are on deploying 5G. Certainly some of that technology is entering into the ecosystem of what we will need for 5G, but there's some big hurdles. Let me give you an example. Spectrum. We need spectrum opened up. And so one of the things that 5G now that we've been trying to do is advocate for a good spectrum transfer. There's something called Goldilocks spectrum, and that's the sweet spot for us to have a more rapid deployment of 5G gear across the United States. So Chairman Pai has done a wonderful job. He's done some of that. We're going to have that spectrum. It's going to open up the companies that are in the spectrum. Some of the satellite companies that have been operating in that band, if you will, for a long, long time, invested money in it, have said, we think we can do this. We're going to participate in handing off this spectrum. So that really has to happen before we really get to 5G, number one. And number two, little things. We have to get rid of the old Huawei gear. We have to rip and replace and do things like that to make sure that our trusted vendor infrastructure has the capability to actually win this fight and become real vendors in the next 5G build out that's going to happen. So all of those little things, I call it the underbrush of 5G, needs to get there. And you're right, we have lots of towers to put up. Millimeter wave probably works okay in cities because there's lots of density, but you still have to have lots of antennas. You get this other spectrum, it's the sub-6 they call it, is really, really good stuff. So that would give us more options and more opportunities to build out. And then again, siting these towers all across the United States. Some cities have banned 5G towers because they think there's something bad with them. So we have an education campaign to go on to make sure people are making decisions based on what is really happening with these towers and what it means to the economy. And man, we do not want to come in second place on 5G to China. That would be a disaster for future prosperity of generations of Americans.
The Hill is a place, and you know the Hill well. The Hill likes lists. What are the best lobbying firms? What are the worst? What are the best cities in the country that are getting 5G right? What are the worst?
It would be hard to say. The cities who have come out and banned, and there's several, and I don't want to embarrass them.
Go ahead and embarrass it. It's a great opportunity. Put a spotlight on them.
Oh my God. I would say those cities, they tend to be out west, concentrated out west, are making a serious mistake by banning 5G towers and the ability to move 5G. Cities that are getting it right. And remember, 5G will be most impactful for cities up front because it's going to be easier to deploy. You'll have the market valuation of, I'm going to get a return on my investment if I invest in 5G in New York and Chicago and Miami and San Francisco and Los Angeles much quicker than I will if I'm trying to build it out in rural broadband, which is a whole nother issue we hopefully will deal with someday. But that's going to happen first. So those cities are going to get it right first. A lot of cities are competing for it. They want to be the first. They want to be that first city that has 5G. And really why this is important, you think about wireless cars, telemedicine, remote manufacturing, remote surgery, all of that has to have a 5G very low latency. And that latency is likely to happen in cities first, and then we're going to build our way out. And that's not, obviously we need to build it out if we're going to have a more robust participation. So cities, for the most part, are going to be okay. It's just these few knockoffs who have decided that 5G does something bad for you, which there's no scientific evidence to show that. That's where we're going to bump into some problems. But the problem is with those cities, we'll go right around it, and everyone else will be prospering with this new 5G technology. And remember, it's like it is almost $4 trillion in the next 15 years, 22 million jobs just surrounding the 5G build out. And then all of the things that happen because of 5G, we can't do on 4G.
So, Mike, one of the great geopolitical contests today between China and the United States is over 5G. And so you just mentioned a moment ago Huawei and those issues. And I'm just going to try to be polite, but to those of us who watch it and have been watching, these relationships for years, it's confusing because some days it looks like the president is using the Huawei issue as a negotiating ploy and that he might give it. And we saw that with ZTE. What is the line between using something and holding a firm hostage over something and really saying it's a clear national security issue? Because those of us, and Bob Cusack and I were talking about earlier, those of us who might see that, okay, it's a national security issue, then what are you doing to actually build an option? Where's your strategy with Europe, with Ericsson, with Nokia, with other vendors and possibilities with Qualcomm to deal with that? Because otherwise, you've divided the world. So I'm just interested, are you engaged at all in that debate on saying, okay, if you're going to go that direction, then these other steps are required? Because a lot of us don't see those other steps being put in place.
Yeah, I am involved, and I will say that we're a little bit slow in this. That's what's been frustrating to a lot of us. And I think the president was right to say, hey, we've had enough of these unfree market principles being engaged to beat back competition from what we would call trusted vendors, companies like Nokia or Ericsson or others. And so what can we do? And let me back up. The Chinese government has decided they want Huawei and ZTE to be their dominant players worldwide. So what are they doing to ensure that? They're spending billions of dollars on research and development, the government, not the companies, the government, and then the companies are subsidized by the government to give these outrageous deals. The one I heard just the other day, a 20-year payment plan where you pay zero for the first 3 years, all the engineering, all of the costs for putting it up at the network and operating the network is not charged to you. There is no market-based business in the world that can do that and can compete with that. So people have been saying, well, gosh, it's almost free. I might as well take it.
Well, Mike, that used to be called dumping, but we were part of the WTO and we could go challenge nations that were dumping, but the United States is not really helping the WTO very well. So, I don't mean to interrupt, but we used to call that dumping, right?
Fine. Well, completely. Or, they're illegally subsidizing these business deals. Now, there are things that we can do, what we would do with a free market approach to this. And we want to strengthen, by the way, those trusted vendor networks. So, one of the ways we can do that, this plan called Rip and Replace that Congress has passed, I think it's about $2 billion to say where Huawei gear did get infiltrated into these networks when there wasn't as much heightened security for it. We need to get rid of that gear and replace it as fast as we can. We should help the companies do that, number one. Number two, what we can do to beat back these Chinese subsidized deals is offer our own loan programs. And we used to do this a lot more, where, if you had a company that needed a loan to do business and fill in the blank, you still had to pay the loan back, which is unlike the Chinese model. But it does help make these vendors more competitive. And we can do that under the national security guise. And I argue, yeah, we ought to do that. We need to compete in this. And this is the thing that I think is lost on this whole topic, Steve, that I think is really important. So in the last couple of years, China has used this something called social scoring system. And every citizen in China gets assigned this kind of a grade, if you will, based on really hundreds of points of data that the government collects on these citizens. And because the Chinese Communist Party didn't like the performance of that particular citizen. Last year alone, they did something like 3 million denials of domestic travel, meaning can't buy an airline ticket, can't buy a bus ticket, can't buy a train ticket, because the Communist Party decided they didn't like who you were doing. This is the same government that's investing in this 5G build out all over the world, saying, hey, nothing to worry about. No, nothing to see here. Move along. And for some reason, we've had a difficult time getting people to understand that once the Chinese touch your data, they're going to own your data. And we just can't have that. That's why we've been on this kind of aggressive push to say we have to do better. And yes, pulling out of the WTO was not a great, I think that was the wrong solution. I think we should have gotten in there and knocked elbows a little bit versus just saying I quit. There's lots to improve there for sure. But I think we could have done better by staying in and, as I said, throwing a few elbows. And then go after these other programs, but we have to do it soon. So Spectrum, cleaning out the underbrush, doing these programs to say we're going to help our trusted vendors replace gear in the United States, makes them more competitive. And then once we get that spectrum, let these companies invest in it. It's going to go crazy, and we will reap the benefit of that.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned the China case, the social capital, facial recognition, because I think we still have to have more discussions about the governance of this technology in America as well. We've got a question for you from our public. So, Michael, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Michael Novak. I'm with the Open Voice Network. We're a nonprofit directed fund of the Linux Foundation, focused on making conversational voice worthy of user trust in the private and public sector. Currently, we are leading a collaborative cross-industry initiative to develop policies and standards that will enable secure, easy access to public agencies and services that citizens are accustomed to over any conversational voice assistant platform. My question today concerns conversational voice capabilities. During the COVID era, social distancing is becoming the norm. What policy and practical implementation obstacles still need to be overcome? And what role do our guests think that voice-controlled capabilities can play to serve communities and the public good in formal education, healthcare, and social service accessibility? Thank you for your time.
Well, Mike, this is a really important question. So, I'm going to just piggyback on what Michael Novak just shared, which is, certainly he's saying, where's voice going to go? How do we get this right? But part of the question, and I hope you can share it with the audience, is what does the 5G world open up as by way of opportunity? 4G, we had Lyft, Uber, lots of other businesses. He's asking about voice in a kind of very different sense of density of data and transfer. So as you explain 5G, and you're going to respond to Michael, but can you just, as we wrap up here, kind of give the best pitch you can of what comes next by way of opportunity from 5G?
Yeah, well, I mean, think about all the things that probably won't happen as we come out of 5G. Probably not as much travel as we used to do. Do you really need to do four board meetings remotely? Or now can you use a platform, a voice platform and a video platform to engage in certain numbers? Now, I'm an in-person kind of guy. I think we need to have those interpersonal relationships, and all of that is very, very important. But I do think businesses are going to take a new look at what kind of interaction that means. So can you do a lot more from home, or at least a percentage from home that we couldn't do before? And I think people have seen the productivity levels of working at home, which has been, really a positive thing. Same with education. So I do believe kids, that K through 12 experience to me is really important. I don't think we ought to wipe it out and say everybody stay at home and stare at a TV screen for 6 hours. That's just not going to work. But what we could do is have a layered approach to that, where you have some sense of time at home versus time in a classroom. I do think that can happen. And you can also, some of your best teachers can teach more kids based on the ability to connect online. Huge benefit, I think, for kids who don't have access or have a long travel time to get to school, those kinds of things. So on education, I think this is going to just rock that world in a good and positive way if we get it right. But making sure that everybody has that connectivity. How what we found in this, when people had stay-at-home orders and they were still trying to have classroom time, Some kids just did not have access. They didn't have access to a computer, if they had a computer, didn't have access to the right bandwidth to be able to conduct real time and connect to an education environment. And then again, you have to have great support around some of these children. Everybody learns differently, and some kids just don't learn well by staring at a TV screen for any length of time. All of that is going to have to be worked through. However, that being said, we need to make sure that through 5G, rural broadband build out, all of that, that all the kids in America have the opportunity to gain that educational value from being connected. And same with telemedicine. In areas that don't have, we have huge swaths of the country don't have gynecology or fill in the blank. They don't have heart surgeons or whatever. And there are a lot of cases around the world that have that. What better way to fill in that hole? It doesn't replace it, but what better way to supplement that than having remote telemedicine? We're not going to get this right if you don't have good both voice and video quality interaction. And again, you don't want to have a meeting where you're getting ready to tell your doctor and the pain here is doing this, and it gets all blurry, and the doctor comes back and says, "Ooh, I think you're fine," because I didn't hear what that was. And so those are the kinds of things we have to get right in order for this to work for the next generation. But think of the productivity on just the data side. Remember, 50% of the data now is going to be out at the edge of these networks, which means we're used to controlling data at the core and in the center. That's going to be gone. Half of that data has to be out at the edge. That's going to fundamentally change the way we look at privacy, which I think a little bit that Michael was talking about, and how we communicate. All of that is going to have a policy implication and a technology and a security implication as well.
Well, Mike Rogers, former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, chairman of 5G Action Now, thank you so much for your time today and your insights on this, and I hope you'll come back.
I hope so. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Great to be with you.